what has happened to Syria? Why are Syrians scattered in different places around the world with no country to call home? It all started with a bullet fired by the Syrian military at Syrian citizens protesting for a better life. The Syrian crisis started with a simple protest against the Assad regime in March 2011. The unrest began within the context of Arab Spring protests. The Arab Spring was a revolutionary wave of protests, riots, and civil wars in the Middle East that began on December 18, 2010 in Tunisia. Then the wave spread throughout the countries of the Arab League and its surroundings. By the end of February 2012, rulers in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen were forced from power. While the Arab Spring faded by mid-2012, the most radical discourse from it is still an ongoing war in Syria. The Syrian government had mainly relied on its armed forces, but from early stages Syria received technical, financial, military, and political support from Russia, Iran, and Iraq. On September 30th, 2015, Russia started its own air campaign at the request of the government of Syria. This has resulted in a proxy war waged between the US and Russia, which has led some commenters to characterize the situation as a pro-world war, with nearly a dozen countries involved in two overlapping conflicts. While all this fighting happening between the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian forces, Syrian people were getting bombed, injured, their houses were getting destructed, and their lives just became meaningless. The severity of this humanitarian disaster in Syria has been outlined by the UN and many international organizations. More than 7.6 million Syrians have been internally displaced. More than 5 million have fled the country to nearby countries such as Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, and Kuwait. And a few 100,000 have fled to European Union, becoming refugees. Millions more have been left in poor living conditions with shortage of food and drinking water. So what can people around the world do to help these unfortunate Syrian refugee families rebuild their lives? Toronto-based group Lifeline Syria seeks to help local organizations sponsor 1,000 Syrian refugees and bring them to the Greater Toronto area. Because there are many responsibilities, a sponsoring group should include 5 or more individuals who can share the load. The two main areas that every group will be responsible for providing are time and finances. So how much time does sponsoring a family take? The first 12 months will likely be the most demanding as the family deals with the shock of coming to an entirely new place and starting a new life. But over time, their comfort level in Canada increases. The need for your support will be reduced. Specifically, as a sponsoring group, you will be doing the following during the first 12 months. Meet the family at the airport when they arrive and escort them to accommodation. Assist the family in finding a house. Make sure the family's needs are covered for clothing, furnishing, and food. Make sure they're healthy. Make sure they're well familiar with the city and the transportation system, and help them find appropriate training and jobs. How much money is sponsoring your family going to cost? A refugee family of 4 will require a minimum of $20,000, plus startup costs of $7,000. A family of 5 is going to cost about $22,000 and $500,000, plus $7,200 as startup money. Startup money is used to buy household items such as beds, pots, and pans, and winter clothing. A rough rule of thumb is that the cost will be equivalent to a family on social assistance. If a refugee becomes financially self-sufficient during the 12 months sponsorship period, the sponsors are not obligated to provide income support for the remainder of the sponsorship. I have interviewed Douglas Grant, professor at Senate College in the journalism program. He has sponsored a Vietnamese family back in the 1980s, and this is how his experience was.
In 1980, I was part of a group of about 6 people who sponsored a family from Laos, which is beside Vietnam. It was part of the boat people. We supported a Laotian family in 1980 for a year until they got set up. I can't remember how much it cost. Part of the cost was deferred because we got a co-op to give us an apartment for a year, rent-free. And part of the deal was we would fix up the apartment for them. We got some beds and, you know, the basic things, kitchen utensils people needed. So, you know, we helped these people find jobs. The first job they got was picking worms on a golf course, which they made actually quite good money at. But and some of the women, they worked at a computer factory. They made computer boards. So they were real go-getters. Their English was so-so. It was okay. It wasn't great, but it was good enough. And they really wanted to work. They were great people in that way. So a big highlight of the year was that one of the women had a baby, and I had to rush her to the hospital. And when she went into labor, and she couldn't speak English, she had the worst English of anyone. So it was pretty tense there that her baby was born okay, and he was. And they called him Joe, after the Prime Minister, Joe Clark at the time. Their daughter, who was born in the refugee camp, the last time I saw her, she was 16 years old. She was just like a 16-year-old teen girl that you see on the street everywhere. She was very assimilated. And so they did very well, and it was a very good experience.
So why should we sponsor a Syrian refugee family? Syrian refugees are not agents of terror, but they are victims. Syrian refugees in the millions were forced to flee their homes and their country in the face of brutal and deadly onslaught. Acts of terrorism as brutal as those that recently happened in Paris and Beirut spawn fear, chaos, and distrust. They are intended to shake our resolve and challenge our values, but they also give us an opportunity to recommit to what we believe in. I have interviewed 2 Syrian refugees who are fresh in Canada. The first Syrian refugee I have interviewed is a 22-year-old Majid Al-Kai.
I arrived here fresh, 21 years old when I arrived here. I was like, okay, you know, and when I tried to get my family, I heard about how the procedure is very hard. Yeah, it started becoming complicated. Calling the immigration every day, asking them questions, then trying to send an invitation. It's quite hard. So I called the UNHCR, and I told them the story, and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna try to do whatever it takes." We didn't have like any hope. We were like, "That's our last hope," you know. And then I called Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. I called every organization. Like, I started Googling every organization in Thailand and called pretty much all of them.
Majid's family is still in Syria. He hasn't seen them in almost 2 years.
I do miss them for sure. Like, my mom is weeping every day, literally, on the phone. A lot of refugees here, and they're dealing with it like normally, like they're treating you like a normal person, which is how it should be.
The second Syrian refugee I have interviewed is Luail Musli, and he has been only in Canada for 8 days. This is how he feels about this new country.
For now, I am very excited to be here in Canada. Everything looks like green, white spaces. It's peaceful place. Yeah, we were living in peace in Syria before the events which happened in Syria. And the movement, everything changed. The demonstration spread around the country. They are demanding for the freedom, dignity, but the Syrian regime started to deal with the people with the force. They started to shoot the people who are going with the demonstration. After that, you know, many radical groups started to come to Syria, and the fighting started to spread and burn all the country. The construction of the infrastructure of Syria destroyed by the fighting groups. Actually, I came here, my sister is here, She sponsored me with the other organizations, Salvation Army. Yeah. So, as many of the Syrian people need for the peaceful places to live. So they are now scattered on the regional countries in Jordan and Lebanon in a very bad circumstances. And those people really need to help from the governments and the organizations.
If you think you're capable of sponsoring a Syrian refugee family, don't hesitate to do so. You will be saving at least one life. Please contact Lifeline Syria for more information. From Canada and all around the world, we stand with all Syrians. For Say News, this is Kinda Al-Masri.